Imagine a world where you couldn't watch a show whenever you wanted to, where families gathered around a single box in the living room at specific times to watch grainy black and white images, where there were only 3 channels, and if you missed an episode, it was gone forever. That world existed less than a lifetime ago. Television has transformed from an impossible dream to the dominant medium of the 20th century, and now, in the streaming age, it's transforming again. It's been called the greatest invention of the modern era, blamed for destroying family conversation, credited with bringing down presidents, and accused of dumbing down culture. From mechanical spinning discs to 8K smart displays, from 3 channels to infinite streaming content, from appointment viewing to binge watching, this is the complete history of television. The story of how moving pictures in a box changed everything.
The idea of television, seeing images at a distance, wasn't born in a laboratory. It was born in human imagination, long before the technology existed to make it real. In the 1870s, scientists had already figured out how to transmit sound over wires. The telephone was revolutionizing communication. The next logical question was, could you transmit images? Could you see someone while talking to them? The problem seemed insurmountable. A telephone only needed to transmit variations in sound, a single stream of information. But an image required transmitting thousands of points of light simultaneously. How could you possibly send all that information through a wire? In 1884, a young German student named Paul Nipkow had an idea. He was only 23 years old when he invented what would become the foundation of mechanical television, the Nipkow disc. It was brilliantly simple, a spinning disc with holes arranged in a spiral pattern. As the disc spun in front of an image, each hole would scan one line of the picture. A light sensor behind the disc would convert the light passing through each hole into an electrical signal. On the receiving end, another synchronized spinning disc would reverse the process, with a light source recreating the image one line at a time. Spin it fast enough, say 25 times per second, and the human eye would perceive it as a complete moving picture. Nipkow patented his disc in 1885, but he never built a working system. The technology to amplify weak electrical signals didn't exist yet. His patent expired, forgotten, while he worked as an engineer in Berlin. He had no idea that his spinning disc would launch the television age. It took until the 1920s for someone to make Nipkow's vision real. That someone was a Scottish inventor named John Logie Baird. Baird was an unlikely hero of the television age. He was sickly, half-blind in one eye, and had failed at several business ventures. But he was obsessed with the idea of transmitting images. Working in a cramped attic workshop in London, using salvaged materials, an old tea chest, bicycle lamp lenses, knitting needles, sealing wax, and a biscuit tin, Baird built a mechanical television system based on the Nipkow disc. On October 2, 1925, Baird achieved what no one else had. He successfully transmitted a recognizable image of a ventriloquist dummy named Stooky Bill. The image was crude, only 30 lines of resolution, flickering, and barely recognizable. But it moved. For the first time in history, a complete moving image had been transmitted and reproduced. Baird was so excited that he ran downstairs to grab a human subject. He found an office boy named William Tangen, and legend says, terrified him by shoving him in front of the apparatus and offering him half a crown to sit still. William Tangen became the first person ever to appear on television. On January 26, 1926, Baird gave a public demonstration to members of the Royal Institution and a journalist from the Times. The headline the next day read, "Television Demonstrated." The age of television had officially begun. But across the Atlantic, another inventor was working on television too. Charles Francis Jenkins, an American inventor who'd already made a fortune on early motion picture technology, demonstrated his own mechanical television system in 1925. He called it radiovision and successfully transmitted silhouette images from a Navy station to his lab in Washington, D.C. The race was on. Throughout the late 1920s, inventors and companies rushed to improve television. Baird managed to transmit images across the Atlantic in 1928 and demonstrated the first color television, very crude, in 1928. He even started the world's first TV station, offering experimental broadcasts. But mechanical television had fatal limitations. The spinning discs could only produce small, dim, low-resolution images. To get more detail, you needed bigger discs with more holes, spinning faster. Some experimental systems used discs 6 feet in diameter. The whole approach seemed to be hitting a wall. Meanwhile, a completely different approach was being developed: electronic television. Instead of mechanical spinning discs, electronic television would use cathode ray tubes to scan images with beams of electrons. No moving parts, high-resolution, brighter images. The future belonged to electronics, not mechanics. And the battle over who would control that future would become one of the bitterest disputes in technology history. But that's the next chapter of our story.
In 1921, a 14-year-old farm boy in Rigby, Idaho, sketched out an idea for his high school chemistry teacher. His name was Philo Taylor Farnsworth, and his sketch showed how you could use electrons to scan and transmit images, the fundamental concept behind electronic television. Farnsworth was a genius. While plowing his family's potato field in neat parallel rows, he had an epiphany. You could scan an image the same way, line by line. He became obsessed with building an all-electronic television system with no moving parts. By 1927, at age 21, working in a small lab in San Francisco funded by private investors, Farnsworth transmitted his first image, a simple straight line. When he rotated the slide in front of the camera, the line on the receiving screen rotated too. His backers were skeptical until Farnsworth transmitted a $sign, a reminder of what they were all there for. On September 7, 1927, Farnsworth successfully transmitted the first electronic television image. His system used a camera tube he called the image dissector and a cathode ray tube for display. It was crude, but it worked, and unlike mechanical television, it could be improved almost infinitely. There was just one problem. Farnsworth wasn't the only one working on electronic television, and he was about to face an opponent with unlimited resources and no scruples about crushing competitors. David Sarnoff was the president of RCA, the Radio Corporation of America, and one of the most powerful men in American business. He'd made his fortune in radio and saw television as the next gold rush. RCA's chief engineer, Vladimir Zworykin, a Russian immigrant, had been working on electronic television since the early 1920s. In 1923, Zworykin filed a patent for an all-electronic television system, though he hadn't actually built a working version. By 1929, he developed the iconoscope camera tube and the kinetoscope display tube, the core technologies for electronic television. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1930, Sarnoff sent Zworykin to visit Farnsworth's lab. Zworykin spent 3 days examining Farnsworth's system, asked detailed technical questions, and saw demonstrations of the image dissector. Farnsworth, proud of his work, showed him everything. Zworykin returned to RCA and reported to Sarnoff. According to Farnsworth, Zworykin said the system was beautiful and far ahead of anything RCA had. Shortly after, RCA began developing systems that looked suspiciously similar to Farnsworth's. RCA offered Farnsworth company for $100,000. When Farnsworth refused to sell, demanding licensing arrangements instead, Sarnoff allegedly said, "RCA doesn't pay royalties, we collect them." What followed was a vicious patent war that lasted years. RCA challenged Farnsworth's patents, claiming Zworykin had invented everything first. They tied Farnsworth up in legal battles, draining his resources. RCA had virtually unlimited legal funding. Farnsworth was burning through his investors' money. The case hinged on whether Farnsworth had truly conceived of electronic television in 1922, 5 years before his first working prototype. His old chemistry teacher, Justin Tolman, testified that Farnsworth had indeed drawn diagrams of an electronic television system on his blackboard in 1922. That testimony, along with Farnsworth's meticulous early notebooks, convinced the courts. In 1935, Farnsworth won. RCA was forced to license his patents, the first time in RCA's history they paid royalties to anyone. But the victory was Pyrrhic. The patent battles had exhausted Farnsworth's resources and delayed commercial development of television. While the legal battles raged, television was slowly becoming real. In 1928, General Electric started experimental broadcasts from a station in Schenectady, New York. The images were tiny, about 2 inches square, but they moved. In 1936, the BBC in Britain launched the world's first regular television service, broadcasting from Alexandra Palace in London. They initially used both Baird's mechanical system and Marconi EMI's electronic system, running on alternate days. Within 3 months, it was clear electronic television was superior. Baird's mechanical system was abandoned. The spinning disc era was over. The BBC's broadcasts reached a tiny audience. There were only about 100 television sets in the entire country, but it proved television could work as a regular service. Programming included news, plays, music performances, and sports. In 1937, the BBC televised the coronation of King George VI, the first major event broadcast on television. In America, the 1939 World's Fair in New York became television's coming-out party. RCA sponsored the exhibition, and President Franklin Roosevelt appeared on television, the first U.S. president to be televised. Sarnoff, hosting the event, declared, "Now we add sight to sound." RCA began selling television sets to the public. They were expensive, about $600, equivalent to over $12,000 today. And programming was limited to a few hours a week, but they were beautiful objects, massive wooden consoles with tiny screens, looking more like furniture than electronics. By 1941, commercial television was finally ready to launch. The FCC approved commercial broadcasting to begin on July 1, 1941. NBC, CBS, and a handful of other stations started regular programming. The first TV commercial aired on July 1, 1941, a Bulova watch advertisement that simply showed a watch, a clock, and the words Bulova time. It cost $9. But television's growth was about to be interrupted by something much bigger. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America entered World War II. Television development essentially stopped. Factories that would have made TV sets instead made radar equipment and other military electronics. Television would have to wait. But the technology had been proven. The patents were settled. The infrastructure was being built. When the war ended, television would explode into American life with a force that would change everything.
When World War II ended in 1945, America was ready for television. The country was prosperous, optimistic, and hungry for entertainment. Soldiers returning from war were starting families, buying houses in new suburbs, and looking for ways to spend their money. Television was about to give them exactly what they wanted. In 1945, there were fewer than 7,000 television sets in the entire United States. By 1950, there were 6 million. By 1955, half of American homes had a television. By 1960, 90% did. No technology in history had been adopted so quickly. The transformation was staggering. In 1948, Americans bought 190,000 TV sets. In 1949, they bought over 3 million. Stores couldn't keep them in stock. Families saved up for months to afford one. When a family got their first television, neighbors would crowd into their living room to watch. The impact on American culture was immediate and profound. Movie theaters saw attendance drop by nearly half. Radio listening plummeted. Restaurant business declined on popular TV nights. Cities reported drops in water usage during popular shows. Everyone was holding it until commercials. 3 networks dominated: NBC, CBS, and ABC. They controlled what America watched, and what America watched was live television. Everything was broadcast live because videotape hadn't been invented yet. If you missed a show, it was gone forever. This created appointment viewing. You had to be home at 8 p.m. Tuesday to watch your favorite show. Early programming was experimental and diverse. Milton Berle hosted Texaco Star Theater on NBC starting in 1948, becoming television's first megastar. The show was so popular that people bought TVs just to watch it. Berle was called Mr. Television and Uncle Milty. Legend says he sold more television sets than any salesman. In 1951, I Love Lucy premiered on CBS, and television would never be the same. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz created a sitcom that was groundbreaking in multiple ways. First, they insisted on filming it with multiple cameras in front of a live audience, creating the multi-camera sitcom format still used today. Second, They filmed it on high-quality 35mm film rather than kinescope, which meant the show could be rerun and wouldn't degrade in quality. That decision created the rerun. Before I Love Lucy, television shows were live one-time events. After I Love Lucy, shows could be shown again and again, creating an entirely new revenue stream: syndication. Desi Arnaz, who is much more than just Lucy's husband, was a brilliant businessman who negotiated to own the I Love Lucy films. That decision made them tens of millions of dollars. I Love Lucy became the most-watched show in America. The episode where Lucy gave birth, mirroring Lucille Ball's real pregnancy, was watched by 44 million people, more than watched President Eisenhower's inauguration the next day. The show proved that television could create massive, shared cultural moments. Live television also created incredible drama. Playhouse 90 and other anthology series broadcast live 90-minute plays, often with prestigious actors and directors. Marlon Brando, Paul Newman, and Grace Kelly appeared on live television dramas. The tension of live broadcasting, where mistakes couldn't be edited out, created electric performances. The Ed Sullivan Show, which ran from 1948 to 1971, became a cultural institution. Sullivan, a former newspaper columnist with an awkward on-screen presence, somehow created the most successful variety show in TV history. Elvis Presley's appearance in 1956, famously shot from the waist up to hide his scandalous hip movements, drew 60 million viewers, over 80% of the TV audience. But television's golden age had a dark side. The quiz show scandals of the late 1950s shocked America and revealed that television wasn't always what it seemed. Quiz shows like The $64,000 Question and 21 were huge hits, offering contestants life-changing amounts of money. America became obsessed with these shows and their contestants. Charles Van Doren, a handsome Columbia University professor, became a national celebrity by winning $129,000 on 21. But it was all rigged. Producers fed contestants the answers, coached them on how to create dramatic tension, and determined who would win based on who made for better TV. When the scandal broke in 1959, it devastated public trust in television. Van Doren was forced to admit before Congress that he'd been given answers. He was arrested for perjury. His life was ruined. The quiz show era ended abruptly. The scandal led to increased regulation of television and a loss of innocence about the medium. Meanwhile, color television was slowly developing. The technology existed. CBS and RCA had developed competing color systems in the 1940s, but color TVs were expensive, over $1,000, about $10,000 today. Most shows were still broadcast in black and white, and the color systems were incompatible with existing black and white sets. RCA's system eventually won because it was compatible with black and white sets, meaning people could still watch color broadcasts on their old TVs, just in black and white. NBC, owned by RCA, pushed color aggressively, starting to broadcast many shows in color in the mid-1950s. But color adoption was slow. As late as 1964, only 3% of American homes had color TVs. The real breakthrough came in 1965 when NBC announced that 95% of its primetime programming would be in color. Suddenly, having a black and white TV felt obsolete. By 1972, half of American homes had color TVs. The 1950s also saw television begin to shape politics. The 1952 presidential campaign was the first where television played a major role. Eisenhower's campaign used TV commercials, short, punchy ads that were revolutionary at the time. His opponent, Adlai Stevenson, thought TV ads were beneath the dignity of politics. Eisenhower won in a landslide. Television was no longer just entertainment. It was becoming the primary way Americans experienced the world. News, politics, sports, culture, everything was filtered through the small screen in the living room. The 1950s established television's place in American life, but the 1960s would prove its power to change the world.
The 1960s began with a moment that proved television's power to shape history: the Kennedy-Nixon debates. On September 26, 1960, Senator John F. Kennedy and Vice President Richard Nixon faced each other in the first-ever televised presidential debate. 70 million Americans watched, the largest audience for a television program up to that point. The debate revealed television's power and its peculiar nature. On radio, most listeners thought Nixon won. He was more experienced and substantive. But on television, Kennedy dominated. He looked young, confident, and presidential. Nixon, recovering from a knee injury and refusing makeup, looked sweaty, tired, and uncomfortable. Kennedy understood television instinctively. Nixon treated it like radio with pictures. That difference may have decided the election. Kennedy won by the narrowest margin in history, just 113,000 votes out of 69 million cast. Television had chosen a president. The Kennedy assassination on November 22, 1963, became television's defining moment of the decade. For 4 days, the networks broadcast nothing but coverage of the assassination and funeral. No commercials, no regular programming, just nonstop news. 90 million Americans, 96% of the TV audience, watched the funeral. The nation mourned together, watching the same images simultaneously. Television created shared national grief in a way that had never been possible before. Walter Cronkite of CBS News famously removed his glasses and fought back tears while announcing Kennedy's death. That moment of shared emotion bound Americans together. But television in the 1960s wasn't just about politics, it was transforming culture in every direction. In 1962, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson premiered. Carson would host for 30 years, becoming one of the most powerful figures in entertainment. Making it big on Carson's show could launch a career. Comedians, actors, and musicians treated an appearance on Carson as validation that they'd made it. Star Trek premiered in 1966, barely lasted 3 seasons, but became one of the most influential shows in television history. Creator Gene Roddenberry used science fiction to tackle contemporary issues like racism, war, and prejudice. The show featured television's first interracial kiss between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura in 1968. Star Trek proved television could be more than just entertainment. It could be visionary. Sesame Street launched in 1969 with a radical idea: television could educate children. The show used commercial techniques, fast pacing, catchy music, bright colors, but taught letters, numbers, and social skills. Critics worried it would rot children's brains. Instead, it became one of the most successful educational programs ever created, helping millions of children prepare for school. The 1960s also saw television document the space race. On July 20th, 1969, an estimated 650 million people worldwide, about 20% of the global population, watched Neil Armstrong step onto the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Television made the space age real. But the 1960s also revealed television's power to confront America with uncomfortable truths. The Vietnam War became known as the living room war because Americans watched it every night during dinner. News footage showed combat, casualties, and the brutal reality of war. Unlike previous wars where information was carefully controlled, Vietnam was documented by TV cameras and broadcast uncensored. The images were devastating. Buddhist monks setting themselves on fire, villages being burned, American soldiers wounded and dying. The famous footage of the Saigon police chief executing a prisoner in the street shocked Americans. Television brought war's horror home, and public opinion turned against the war. In August 1968, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago descended into chaos. Police clashed violently with anti-war protesters outside the convention hall. Inside, delegates fought on the floor. All of it was broadcast live on television. Americans watched their country tearing itself apart in real time. Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, returned from Vietnam in 1968 and told his CBS audience that the war was unwinnable. President Lyndon Johnson reportedly said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." A month later, Johnson announced he wouldn't seek re-election. Television had helped end a presidency and would eventually help end a war. The 1970s began with television achieving something unprecedented, bringing down a president. The Watergate scandal played out on television from 1973 to 1974. The Senate Watergate hearings were broadcast live, creating appointment viewing that rivaled entertainment programming. 85% of Americans watched at least some of the hearings. The nation watched as evidence mounted that President Nixon had covered up a burglary and abused presidential power. On August 8, 1974, Nixon announced his resignation on television. The next day, 110 million Americans, half the population, watched Gerald Ford's swearing-in ceremony. Television had documented a constitutional crisis and helped resolve it peacefully. The power of broadcast journalism had never been clearer. The 1970s also saw television mature as an art form. All in the Family, which premiered in 1971, tackled racism, sexism, and social conflict through the character of Archie Bunker, a bigoted but lovable working-class man. The show was controversial but hugely successful, proving television could address serious social issues within a sitcom format.
MASH set in the Korean War, but really about Vietnam, combined comedy and drama in ways television hadn't seen before. The 1983 series finale drew 106 million viewers, the most-watched television episode in television history at the time. Roots, an 8-part miniseries about slavery and African American history, aired in 1977 and became a cultural phenomenon. The finale drew 100 million viewers. The series forced America to confront the legacy of slavery and became required viewing in schools. Television was educating the nation about its own history. By the end of the 1970s, color television was universal, programming had become sophisticated, and television had proven it could shape politics, culture, and society. The three networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC, controlled what Americans watched, and what Americans watched mattered enormously. But that monopoly was about to be broken. New technologies were emerging that would give viewers more control, more choices, and eventually, the power to watch whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. The television revolution was just beginning.
For 3 decades, television meant 3 networks. You watched what NBC, CBS, or ABC decided to broadcast when they decided to broadcast it. If you didn't like what was on, you could switch channels or turn the TV off. Those were your only options. But in the mid-1970s, everything started to change. New technologies were about to shatter the network's monopoly and give viewers something they never had before: choice. Cable television had existed since the 1940s. Originally called Community Antenna Television, or CATV. It was invented to bring TV signals to areas with poor reception, mountain valleys or rural areas where broadcast signals couldn't reach. A large antenna would capture signals, and cables would carry them to subscribers' homes. But cable was about to become something much more powerful. In 1975, a struggling cable channel called HBO, Home Box Office, did something revolutionary. They used a satellite to distribute their signal nationwide. Instead of programming being limited to what could be broadcast locally, cable systems could now receive signals from anywhere. HBO had launched in 1972, showing movies and sports to cable subscribers in Pennsylvania. Using satellite distribution, they could suddenly reach the entire country. On September 30th, 1975, HBO broadcast the Thrilla and Manila boxing match between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier via satellite. It was a watershed moment, the beginning of the cable era. The genius of HBO was simple. They charged a monthly subscription fee so they didn't need advertisers. That meant they could show movies uncut, without commercials. They could broadcast content that would never make it past network censors. For viewers tired of the same sanitized network programming, HBO was a revelation. Other cable networks followed. In 1979, C-SPAN launched, broadcasting congressional proceedings, something the networks would never do. In 1980, Ted Turner launched CNN, Cable News Network, a 24-hour all-news channel that everyone said would fail. Who would watch news 24 hours a day, critics asked. CNN's breakthrough came in 1981 when John Hinckley Jr. shot President Reagan. CNN was the only network providing continuous live coverage. Suddenly, everyone understood the value of 24-hour news. During the 1991 Gulf War, CNN's live coverage from Baghdad made the network indispensable. CNN had transformed how the world received news. But the cable channel that had the biggest cultural impact was MTV, music television, which launched on August 1st, 1981. The first words spoken on MTV were, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll." The first video played was "Video Killed the Radio Star" by the Buggles. It was prophetic. MTV transformed music. Suddenly, artists needed compelling visuals, not just good songs. Michael Jackson's Thriller video became a cultural phenomenon, a 14-minute short film that was an event. Madonna, Prince, and countless others became superstars partly because of their innovative videos. MTV didn't just broadcast culture, it created culture. The network also launched reality TV with The Real World in 1992, a show that put strangers in a house and filmed what happened. It seems quaint now, but it was revolutionary. Unscripted television that was cheaper to produce than scripted shows and often more compelling. By 1990, cable had exploded. There were dozens of cable channels: ESPN for sports, Nickelodeon for kids, A&E for arts, the Weather Channel, the Discovery Channel, the History Channel. The idea of only having 3 channels seemed absurd. The network's monopoly was broken forever. But cable wasn't the only technology disrupting television. VCRs, videocassette recorders, were giving viewers control over time itself. VCRs had been available since the 1970s, but they were expensive and complicated. 2 formats battled for dominance: Sony's Betamax and JVC's VHS.
Betamax had better picture quality, but VHS could record longer, up to 6 hours on a single tape. In a format war that became legendary in tech history, VHS won. Partly because the auto industry chose VHS. Yes, really, auto content often determines which technology succeeds. By the mid-1980s, VCR prices had dropped below $300, and Americans were buying them by the millions. The implications were profound. For the first time, you could record shows and watch them later, called time shifting. You could skip commercials. You could rent movies and watch them at home instead of going to a theater. Hollywood tried to stop VCRs. In 1984, the Supreme Court heard the Betamax case, Universal and Disney suing Sony, claiming VCRs enabled piracy. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that recording TV shows for personal use was legal fair use. If the ruling had gone the other way, VCRs would have been banned, and the entire home video industry would never have existed. Video rental stores exploded. Blockbuster, which opened its first store in 1985, became a cultural institution. By the mid-1990s, Blockbuster had thousands of stores and was renting millions of videos every day. The ritual of browsing video store shelves on Friday night, arguing with friends about what to rent, became part of American life. VCRs also created a new revenue stream for Hollywood. Studios initially feared home video would kill theatrical releases. Instead, it created a massive new market. Movies could make more money on video than in theaters. Disney would famously put their classic animated films in the vault, limiting availability to create artificial scarcity and drive sales. The combination of cable and VCRs meant viewers had unprecedented control. You weren't limited to what the 3 networks decided to broadcast at 8 p.m. You could watch dozens of cable channels, you could record shows for later, you could rent any movie you wanted. But this was just the beginning. The 1990s would bring even more dramatic changes: satellite TV, digital video recorders, and the early stirrings of internet video. Television was evolving from a broadcast medium to an on-demand medium. The revolution would continue.
The 1990s began with television still being primarily analog, signals transmitted as continuous waves, limited by the physical constraints of broadcast spectrum. By the end of the decade, everything would be digital, opening possibilities that would fundamentally transform the medium. In the early 1990s, satellite television companies launched services that would challenge cable's dominance. DirecTV launched in 1994, offering digital picture quality and more channels than most cable systems. Dish Network followed in 1996. For rural areas that cable couldn't reach economically, satellite was a game changer. For urban viewers, it offered more choices and better picture quality. But the real transformation was happening in how shows were made and what they were about. In the 1990s, something strange happened. Television got good. Really good. Shows like The Sopranos, which premiered on HBO in 1999, proved that television could match or exceed cinema in quality. The Sopranos was complex, morally ambiguous, violent, and brilliant. Exactly the kind of show that would never work on network TV. HBO's slogan became, "It's not TV, it's HBO." They weren't wrong. Premium cable, freed from censorship and the need for massive audiences, could take creative risks. The Wire, 6 Feet Under, Deadwood, HBO produced prestige dramas that critics loved and that won awards, even if audiences were relatively small. The networks fought back by pushing boundaries within broadcast restrictions. NYPD Blue featured partial nudity and harsh language for network TV. ER brought cinematic techniques to weekly television. These shows proved networks could still compete on quality, but nothing dominated the 1990s like reality television. Survivor premiered on CBS in 2000 and became a phenomenon, drawing 51 million viewers for its first season finale. The concept, strangers competing on a remote island, voting each other off, was brilliantly simple and endlessly watchable. Reality TV exploded. Big Brother, The Bachelor, American Idol. These shows were cheap to produce, generated huge ratings, and created water-cooler conversations. American Idol became the most watched show on television, crowning winner after winner who became instant celebrities. Critics hated reality TV, calling it the death of quality television. But viewers couldn't get enough. By the mid-2000s, reality shows dominated primetime. They still do today. The year 1999 brought another innovation that would transform television viewing: TiVo.
TiVo wasn't the first digital video recorder, or DVR, but it was the first one that actually worked well and that regular people could understand. TiVo used a hard drive instead of videotape, meaning you could record hours of programming and access it instantly. But the revolutionary feature was that TiVo could learn what you liked and automatically record shows you might enjoy. It had a season pass feature that would record every episode of your favorite show automatically. Most importantly, TiVo made it incredibly easy to skip commercials. You could fast forward through ads at lightning speed, stopping precisely when the show resumed. Networks were terrified. If everyone could skip commercials, how would television be funded? Cable companies quickly developed their own DVRs, often built into cable boxes. By the late 2000s, DVR penetration had reached 40% of US households. Appointment viewing was dying. You didn't need to be home at 9 p.m. Thursday to watch your favorite show. You could record it and watch whenever you wanted. The phrase, "Did you DVR it?" entered the language. But an older phrase was disappearing. "What's on TV?" was being replaced by "What do you want to watch?" Television was becoming less about the schedule and more about the content. In 2009, the United States completed its transition to digital television broadcasting. All analog TV signals were shut off. If you had an old analog TV without a converter box, it stopped working on June 12, 2009. The digital transition was the biggest change to broadcast television since the introduction of color. Digital broadcasting meant more channels could fit in the same spectrum space. It meant high-definition picture quality. And it meant that television was now fundamentally computer data, not analog signals. That would enable everything that came next. High-definition television, or HDTV, had been promised for decades, but finally became standard in the 2000s. Early HDTVs cost thousands of dollars. By 2010, you could buy a 42-inch HDTV for under $500. The difference was stunning. Suddenly, you could see every detail, every imperfection. Actors complained that HD revealed their wrinkles. Sports in HD were spectacular. But the most important development of this period happened quietly, almost unnoticed at first: internet video. In 2005, 3 former PayPal employees launched a website where anyone could upload and share videos. The first video uploaded to YouTube was titled "Me at the Zoo," an 18-second clip of co-founder Jawad Karim at the San Diego Zoo. It was unremarkable. The implications were revolutionary. YouTube grew explosively. Within a year, people were uploading 65,000 videos a day and watching 100 million videos daily. In 2006, Google bought YouTube for $1.6 billion, a price many thought was insane. It turned out to be one of the best acquisitions in tech history. YouTube didn't seem like a threat to television at first. The videos were short, low quality, amateur. But YouTube was doing something television couldn't: giving everyone a voice. Anyone with a camera could become a broadcaster. The gatekeepers were gone. Meanwhile, another company was quietly preparing to transform television even more. Netflix had launched in 1997 as a DVD-by-mail service, competing with Blockbuster. Their innovation was simple: no late fees, unlimited rentals for a flat monthly fee. By the mid-2000s, Netflix had millions of subscribers and was mailing out millions of DVDs daily. But Netflix's founder Reed Hastings understood that DVDs were temporary. The future was streaming. In 2007, Netflix launched its streaming service, initially offering about 1,000 titles, far fewer than their DVD library. The quality was mediocre, and you needed a decent internet connection. Most people stuck with DVDs. Hulu launched in 2008 as a joint venture between NBC and Fox, offering current TV shows streaming the day after they aired. For the first time, you could legally watch recent TV episodes online without recording them. It was convenient, but seemed like a supplement to television, not a replacement. By 2010, the pieces were in place for a revolution, but most people didn't see it coming. Cable TV was at its peak, nearly 80% of US households subscribed. DVRs were mainstream. HD was standard. Reality TV dominated ratings. The networks and cable companies seemed invincible. But the internet was about to eat television alive.
In 2010, if you'd told someone that within a decade, millions of people would cancel cable, that the dominant form of television would be streaming over the internet, and that tech companies would become Hollywood studios, they'd have thought you were crazy. But that's exactly what happened. The transformation started slowly, then suddenly. Netflix was still primarily a DVD service in 2010, but streaming was growing fast. The company made a bold decision. They would create original content, not just licensed shows from networks, but produce their own. Hollywood laughed. A DVD rental company making TV shows? It seemed absurd. In 2013, Netflix released House of Cards, a political drama starring Kevin Spacey and directed by David Fincher. But the revolutionary part wasn't the star power. It was the release strategy. Netflix dropped all 13 episodes at once. You could watch the entire season in a weekend if you wanted. Binge watching became a phenomenon. The phrase had been around for years, but Netflix made it the default way to watch television. Why wait a week between episodes when you could watch them all now? The addictive just one more episode feeling became central to how people watch TV. House of Cards was a hit. Orange and the Black followed, then Stranger Things, The Crown, Narcos, and dozens more. Netflix proved that streaming services could produce quality content that rivaled and often exceeded traditional television. But Netflix was just the beginning. Amazon had launched Prime Video years earlier as a benefit for Prime members, but they started investing heavily in original content. Transparent and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel won multiple Emmy Awards. Amazon was competing with traditional studios. Then the tech giants arrived. Apple launched Apple TV Plus in 2019, spending billions on original content. Disney, realizing that licensing their content to Netflix was a mistake, pulled everything back and launched Disney Plus in 2019. The service gained 100 million subscribers in 16 months, the fastest growth in streaming history. HBO launched HBO Max, NBC launched Peacock, Paramount launched Paramount Plus. Every media company scrambled to launch its own streaming service. The streaming wars had begun. For viewers, it was simultaneously wonderful and exhausting. You could watch anything, anytime, but you needed subscriptions to multiple services. The average household now subscribed to 4 to 5 streaming services, collectively costing as much as cable used to. People joke that streaming had become the new cable bundle, just more inconvenient. Cord cutting, canceling cable or satellite TV, accelerated dramatically. In 2010, about 90% of U.S. households had traditional pay TV. By 2020, it was below 70%. By 2025, it's projected to be below 50%. Cable, which had seemed invincible, was dying faster than anyone predicted. The impact on traditional television was devastating. Network ratings plummeted. Shows that would have been canceled a decade ago for low ratings were now hits by network standards. The broadcast networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, which had dominated for 70 years, suddenly seemed like dinosaurs. The economics of television completely changed. In the cable era, hit shows could run for 10-plus seasons, making hundreds of episodes. In the streaming era, even successful shows rarely lasted more than 3 to 4 seasons. Netflix would cancel shows after 2 to 3 seasons regardless of quality because they'd extracted most of the value. Binge watchers had already subscribed. This created a crisis in TV production. Writers, actors, and crew members who'd relied on steady work from long-running shows found themselves constantly between jobs. The phrase peak TV emerged to describe the era. There were more scripted shows being produced than ever before, over 500 per year by 2019, but each show employed fewer people for shorter periods. The 2023 Writers Guild strike centered partly on streaming economics. Writers argued that streaming services were using their work to build massive businesses while paying them far less than traditional TV did. After a 148-day strike, they won improved terms, but the fundamental tension remained. Streaming had changed TV economics forever. The technology continued evolving. Smart TVs became standard with streaming apps built directly into the TV, no separate device needed. 4K resolution became common, then 8K appeared, though few people could tell the difference. OLED screens offered perfect blacks and stunning contrast. But the most dramatic change was in content itself. Streaming services freed from broadcast censorship and desperate for content that would drive subscriptions pushed boundaries constantly. Nudity, violence, profanity, things that would never appear on broadcast TV became standard on streaming. More importantly, streaming enabled niche content that would never have survived on broadcast TV. Shows about chess like The Queen's Gambit, Korean survival games like Squid Game, and animated sitcoms about depression like BoJack Horseman became massive hits. The traditional television model required shows to appeal to the broadest possible audience. Streaming rewarded shows that appealed intensely to specific audiences. International content exploded. Money Heist from Spain, Dark from Germany, Lupin from France, streaming made global content accessible to American audiences with subtitles or dubbing. Squid Game, a Korean show, became Netflix's most-watched series ever, viewed by over 1.6 billion hours in its first month. Social media changed how people watch TV. Live tweeting during shows became common. Memes from shows spread instantly. Shows like Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead became social phenomena, partly because of social media discussion. Missing an episode meant being left out of conversations. The pandemic accelerated everything. With people stuck at home in 2020, streaming subscriptions surged. Netflix added 37 million subscribers in 2020 alone. Disney Plus grew from 0 to 100 million subscribers in just over a year. Production shut down for months, creating a content drought, but also demonstrating how dependent people had become on streaming entertainment. By 2025, traditional television is in crisis. Local news is disappearing as ad revenue evaporates, network sitcoms and dramas struggle to find audiences. Even sports, the last thing keeping many people subscribed to cable, is moving to streaming, with major leagues signing deals with Apple, Amazon, and others. Looking ahead, television's future is both exciting and uncertain. Artificial intelligence is beginning to impact production. AI can now generate scripts, create visual effects, even digitally de-age actors or resurrect dead performers. Some see this as opportunity, others see it as threatening livelihoods. Interactive television, promised for decades, is finally arriving. Black Mirror Bandersnatch let viewers make choices that affected the story. Some predict fully interactive narratives where every viewer experiences a different story based on their choices. Virtual reality and augmented reality promise immersive experiences beyond anything traditional television offered. Imagine watching a sports game from any angle you choose, or stepping inside a drama and experiencing it as a character. But perhaps the biggest question is whether television even means anything anymore. When you watch Netflix on your phone during your commute, is that television? When you watch a YouTube video on your laptop, is that television? The boundaries between television, internet video, and gaming are disappearing. The screens are everywhere now. Phones, tablets, laptops, TVs, watches, even refrigerators. Content is abundant, infinite, overwhelming. The algorithms decide what we watch, learning our preferences and feeding us more of what we like, creating filter bubbles and echo chambers. We've gone from 3 channels to infinite choices, from appointment viewing to binge watching, from passive consumption to interactive experiences, from broadcast to streaming, from scarcity to overwhelming abundance. Television has transformed from a technology into an ecosystem, from a medium into a platform, from a shared cultural experience to a personalized algorithmic feed. And yet, fundamentally, we're still doing what people started doing in the 1940s, sitting in front of a screen, watching stories unfold, laughing, crying, and being transported to other worlds. The technology has changed beyond recognition, but the human desire for stories, connection, and entertainment remains exactly the same.